scratching the surface of Wang and his fellow schemers' ties to the US government. This is Jimmy Lai. He's worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and he's often called the Rupert Murdoch of...
So take a quick look at the guy that he just talked about, Jimmy Lai, and then think about what he's about to say.
25 years ago by the CIA. And that's just scratching the surface of Wang and his fellow schemers' ties to the US government. This is Jimmy Lai. He's worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and he's often called the Rupert Murdoch of Hong Kong. Lai is a central figure in the protest movement. He uses his tabloid media empire called Apple Daily, the biggest in Hong Kong, to promote the protest. The content is outright racist and xenophobic against mainland Chinese.
So remember, Jimmy Lai, let's pull up a photo of him. He appears to be a Chinese guy, right? But he's apparently also racist against Chinese people. And actually, Dan Cohen goes into this a little.
In the protest movement, he uses his tabloid media empire called Apple Daily, the biggest in Hong Kong, to promote the protest. The content is outright racist and xenophobic against mainland Chinese. Ironic considering Lai grew up on the mainland and came to Hong Kong as a kid to make his fortune. This full-page ad called pregnant women from mainland China locusts who are invading Hong Kong to steal resources. It's Hong Kong's version of the American right-wing trope about pregnant women pouring across the border to deliver so-called anchor babies in the US.
Anchor babies marching down the street because they want their parents to stay in our country.
And
so this is projection. Because the same principle when used, in the Middle East, when it's concerning, or even here in the U.S., when concerning indigenous peoples, whenever American white people go to parts of the country where the left doesn't like them to go, when white people move into urban areas, it's called gentrification. It's evil. When white people leave urban areas and create communities in the suburbs, that's called white flight. Those are two terms that are completely ridiculous, okay? As a libertarian, I think anyone should be able to move wherever they want if communities want to be formed. And this is something that I probably would get some flack from other people. Let's say a community wanted to be formed, and they'd say, we only want black people on this farm, or we only want Mexicans. I would say that there could be, I think we should grant people the right to do that. But people have the freedom of association, and people have the freedom to buy property or rent space wherever they want. Now, if a homeowner doesn't want to let to someone else, there is no problem in my mind. If a homeowner says, I'm not going to rent to people because I don't like who they are, and they're willing to take the hit and not get, their rents go down because they're turning away various different people who want to move in, that's their problem. I've never really seen the economic case against redlining, but this is effectively what he's complaining about. But the fact is, in the United States, we do have laws against redlining. The fact is that the idea that people should be able to deport across your borders and live here and use the services, whether it's educational services, housing, whether it is, overloading the utilities, it's all of those things that they come in and they use. And they end up driving up the taxes of the permanent residents. Those are things that people living here have a legitimate gripe against, especially people who are on the lower rung of the ladder and they don't believe in, they want to get into the labor market. I understand that entirely. If people want a harder immigration policy, that's the prerogative of the people here. But the fact is that in Hong Kong, that's not even the crux of the issue. The real crux of the issue is that most of China is actually run using, the language of choice is Mandarin. And in Hong Kong, it's Cantonese. And there's been a long-term effort by the Chinese government to try to make Hong Kong conform to the rest of China's dictates. And it says, people in Hong Kong have breathed a sigh of relief after senior officials denied planning to replace Cantonese, the local vernacular, with Mandarin, the national language of China. The latest linguistic brouhaha in politically divided Hong Kong started when internet users found a paper on the website of the city's education bureau saying that Cantonese shouldn't be described as the mother tongue of Hong Kongers, as it is only a dialect. Cantonese is the standard bearer of the Southern Chinese UL language with a 2,000-year history. It has preserved more features such as tones and words from ancient Chinese than Mandarin. Leader Carrie Lam was forced to clarify that the Education Bureau had no plans to change its language policy, which it claims is the equal promotion of Cantonese, Mandarin, and English. We are speaking Cantonese every day, so this is a non-issue, Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam says. But this is more than just a linguistic quarrel in Hong Kong. Which form of Chinese is spoken lies at the core of the city's identity. So you could say, if I wanted to use the whole leftist bullshit, paradigm, that the main group of Chinese, the Mandarin speakers, the rest of China, is encroaching on the indigenous tongue of Hong Kong. And that's really the issue here, that Jimmy Lai is a hero. He's a standard bearer, right? This is how it's that easy to just take the bullshit of the left, which claims that Bolivia, for the indigenous people, the white people, meaning the mestizos, they are encroaching on the indigenous people of Bolivia, even though the vast majority of Bolivians are mestizos. In the same case here, I'm saying that, well, look, the majority of Hong Kongers, native Hong Kongers, are Cantonese speakers. They're not Mandarin. So this is a fight to preserve their linguistic heritage and their own, the idea of the Hong Kong people and their thousands and thousands of years of history. See how easy that is, Dan Cohn?
Is tight with Washington. This summer, he came to the U.S. to meet with Mike Pence, Mike Pompeo, and John Bolton, the most hawkish members of the Trump administration. This information isn't talked about in U.S. media, but it shouldn't be a surprise. It's not like the protesters.
The idea that Mike Pompeo is one of the most hawkish members of the Trump administration is ridiculous. Now, I think that he's definitely not a total dove, but he's not supported intervention in Syria. He's, in many cases, been, I think, the brake on the Trump administration getting involved militarily in Latin America. So they just don't like him. And look, I think that Pompeo is certainly worthy of corruption. I think Mike Pence, for sure. Concerning statements that he made in the winter about Venezuela, absolutely, I'm not going to support military intervention there. But that doesn't mean I'm going to take a fucking sword from Nicolas Maduro.
Are trying to hide their affinity for the United States. In September, thousands of demonstrators waving American flags marched to the U.S. consulate to make their demands heard. Not to the Hong Kong government, not to Beijing, but to Washington. Those demands happen to be the same ones that Marco Rubio is pushing for. Still not convinced the West is playing a major role in Hong Kong.
So this is the main message, that people who are international Marxists, which is what Dan Cohn is, that's what the gray zone is, that's what a lot of these people are. They believe in solidarity with protest movements across the world, whether it is in Bolivia or in Brazil or in France or anywhere, Palestine. They believe in solidarity there, and they go and they meet people there, and they believe that their activists should be able to meet with politicians across the world. But it's off limits for the people of Hong Kong, these people who received a sword from the president of Venezuela.
Protest. Watch this BBC report from 2014 on the Oslo Freedom Forum.
In the basement of this 4-star hotel, human rights activists come to what feels a bit like a school for revolution.
According to this report, plans for the 2014 Hong Kong protests, which today's are essentially a continuation of, were plotted long before they started.
This may not evoke the spirit of the barricades, but the teaching here is to be successful, to topple a government for good, you have to be organized and to plan meticulously. And activists here have been involved in helping to organize the current protests in Hong Kong. Their plan to put thousands of people on the streets of the territory was in fact hatched nearly 2 years ago.
And look who makes an appearance in the video.
I'm Joshua Wong, the convener of Scorissa.
Who else is there? Pussy Riot, the young women who have been embraced by US media for, among other things, screaming profanities in a church to stick it to Putin. And then there's none other than
So I am not a supporter of Pussy Riot, but I'd also say it's very ironic that people who, in the United States, they claim that the Christian right is controlling the country and forcing, single mothers to have abortion and making sure that women are barefoot pregnant and unemployed and things like that. That they claim that everyone is homophobic for literally any reason. I think it's very, very rich that these people want to complain about Pussy Riot making a huge ruckus in a church in Russia, for which they were arrested. And you know what? I think, going into a church and doing that, yes, that's trespassing. You should be arrested. But technically that's civil disobedience by the left's book, because they don't believe that religious organizations should have their own, their rights preserved. In fact, nowadays, a lot of these people want religious organizations to be forced to carry out, officiate gay weddings and things like that. You have to be consistent. And if you're not consistent about that, you're basically just showing that you're just a partisan actor.
Sergej Popovic, the Serbian founder of the regime change mercenary group Canvas. Canvas has taken money from the US government and reportedly from the CIA to train untold thousands upon thousands of young people to topple governments around the world that the United States deems adversarial. One of the better-known Canvas trainees is Venezuelan coup frontman Juan Guaido. In other years, figures like Raed Saleh, face of the White Helmets, appeared to form. White Helmets are the propaganda arm of Al-Qaeda in Syria and are funded by the US State Department. The Oslo Freedom Forum is a who's who of regime.
So these guys don't like it that revolutionary activists are being trained here. But the fact is that Cuba, a country that they're allied with, has sponsored the Venceremos brigades since 1969. It says, and you see here, these are protesters in, I believe this is southern Florida. And it says, Cuba is the only country on earth that U.S. citizens can't travel to freely. In the 50-year tradition of the Venceremos Brigade, this July we will travel to Cuba to practice solidarity with the Cuban people and their struggles, many of which are due to U.S. policy. Now, okay, the United States, I believe, people should have the right to do that. They misspelled Tucson over here. What fucking morons. But yeah, this is something that is, I would say, it's ridiculous. Like, we have, this is how to connect with them. They have, you have the 49th contingent application. So these are people who are openly supporting these protests against the U.S. policy towards Cuba here in the United States. And the Venceremos brigades were traditionally sponsored by the Cuban government, right? And they claim the same heritage as them. Here it says Cuba's, so they haven't really gone into it here. But yeah, Venceremos, I think that Joanne Chesimard, aka Asada Shakur, she was a person who supported them. So yes, rules for thee, but not for me.
Clown carbs, charlatans, hucksters, and outright frauds. Past guests include Bill Browder, who stole hundreds of millions of dollars from Russia and renounced U.S. citizenship to avoid paying taxes. In 2010, longtime Venezuelan opposition leader and convicted felon Leopoldo.
So Leopoldo Lopez was a convicted felon, but what was he convicted of? Inciting a riot in Venezuela because he did protest over there against fraudulent elections. So they put him in prison for protesting against fraudulent elections, and that's why they call him a convicted felon.
Lopez spoke, and the Oslo Freedom Forum itself.
By the way, these are people that believe that convicted felons should have all of their voting rights restored here, but for some reason, when it's a convicted felon over there in Venezuela, convicted felon for a political crime, it's not the same standard, right? But as a person who's here in the United States, has raped several people, served many, many years in prison, might even be serving in prison, according to U.S. politicians like Bernie Sanders, they should have the right to vote because reasons, right?
Itself was founded by Lopez's cousin Thor Halvorsen. Sounds like the Hong Kong protest leadership is part of an organic and grassroots movement, right? But what about the issue of police violence? Even if the protests are largely funded by the United States, that doesn't give cops an excuse to crack skulls. Well, judging by the huge amounts of video, the violence in Hong Kong has been initiated and mostly carried out by protesters. When they occupied the airport, they took a journalist captive and took turns beating him unconscious for hours. Then, when he was finally being carted away on a stretcher, one protester ran up and struck him with an American flag. Or how about this video of protesters clashing with...
So we have here, if he's against attacking journalists, was he against this?
To finish, this is very important, brothers and sisters.
Do you know why he has them?
So you can clearly see in the previous frame there's a guy with a Palestinian flag on his back. This is in Washington on May Day 2017.
This is very important, brothers and sisters.
See?
Do you know why he has them?
And this guy attacks his camera. There's Jack Posobiec.
The world is like a book, and every generation has the duty to write in this book.
Okay, and we are here with
Jack Posobiec, Washington Bureau Chief, Rebel Media.
Okay, and what just happened to you just now at the May Day strike / rally / protest?
Yeah, so I was conducting some footage, trying to get interviews from folks in the crowd. I saw one gentleman carrying the North Korean flag, and so I wanted to ask, why bring a North Korean flag out today? At that point, a man, someone I've not met before, came up, punched me in the hand.
So you see the North Korean flag right here, a guy with a keffiyeh on his face. Here's International Workers of the World flag. Those people are the Wobblies. This is the guy, I think, that blocked out his vision.
Out of my hand. It looked like he was going to conduct more.
So they have a gay pride flag, right, over here. They have the Palestinian flag. They have the trans rights flag. No American flag, North Korean flag.
I put him in a defensive headlock, did a very quick Aikido takedown, held him on the ground and said stop. At that point I was kicked in the back or struck in the back by someone else. I was hit in the head with a flag.
You got Antifa flags. You have him hit in the head with North Korean flag.
Andrew Batcher here, who's assaulted numerous people at other things. And at that point, I got my phone, I walked out of the crowd, and I came over here to talk to you guys.
Do you feel that they are trying to oppress your speech by, they're trying to be anti-fascist by promoting fascism, essentially oppressing your speech?
Well, I'm very confused. I mean, I'm not really out here speaking. I'm not out here promoting any message one way or the other. I'm simply trying to give them a platform, try to figure out why they would bring a North Korean flag today. And so, definitely, certainly feel my First Amendment rights as a...
So again, the idea that bringing flags of a foreign country is wrong, you can actually see. So this, again, I'm sorry to pick on the Palestinians again, because obviously it shows my bias. But at the Labor Party conference of, this was 2018, the entire conference was buffeted with Palestinian flags. This entire time, look. Everybody at the conference is waving these flags. So when it's their side, it's all just solidarity. When it's someone else's side, it's regime change chilling.
How would cops react here in the United States? I think it's a safe bet that American police would have zero tolerance and would have shot and killed the protesters.
There was not a single person who was shot during the J20 protests in 2017. Not a single person died. Not a single person was shot. Some people were tear gassed or pepper sprayed, which is apparently it's consistent with what's happened in China. Now, I will say this: in Hong Kong, there haven't been these. There's only been about, to my knowledge, 3. Now, some would say, oh, that's 3 too many. But it's pretty surprising that only 3 people were killed.
The one time Hong Kong police did open fire, well, that was shown endlessly in Western media. What they didn't show is that the rioters were assaulting police and citizens just before that. I'm not arguing as justification for the shooting, But it begs the question, why corporate media is only showing the reaction and not the action? Seems like propaganda to me. In fact, police overreaction.
It seems like propaganda because you know a lot about making propaganda.
Is actually what the protesters are hoping for. One of them spelled it out in the New York Times, calling it marginal violence theory. It calls for use of the most aggressive, non-violent action possible to push the police and to thoughtfully escalate nonviolence. Maybe even resort to violence to push the government to the edge. Watch what Joshua Wong says after he's asked to condemn the violence the protesters have used.
I would say that instead of blame or condemn on any behavior of protester, I prefer to find out the solution and through the trial and error process, and to let us to realize that even protester, they will have the incentive or intention to have self-defense or self-protection. But how to use force and also keep and maintain public support is better for us.
As we've seen, the protesters have gone far beyond mild force. Hong Kong's police have been relatively restrained. There have been injuries on both sides, but that's all. There haven't been any deaths. Compare that to, say, the Gaza Strip, where Israeli snipers have shot thousands upon thousands of unarmed protesters and killed 213.
Now, a lot of those people weren't actually unarmed, and they actually found out that at least 50 of the protesters at some point in 2018 when this was happening were actually affiliated with militant organizations. And I'll try to put a graphic of that when I edit this video.
13 Palestinians, including children and medical personnel. So let's call what's happening in Hong Kong what it is. It's not a pro-democracy movement. It's a US government trained and funded violent separatist movement run by operatives that exploit the plight of Hong Kong's youth to enrich oligarchs and destabilize China. All in all, either the Hong Kong protest leaders are part of an international group of billionaire-funded regime change.
Billionaire-funded regime change operatives. Now, billionaires, of course they have a lot of influence and wealth, but the fact is that countries like Venezuela, they also have billions of dollars that they can spread around in order to spread their influence. So what does it matter if it's a billionaire or if it's a different country?
Operatives led by the United States government as part of a Cold War agenda, or Donald Trump is actually a great liberator of Hong Kong.
So yeah, that's his contention, and I would say that if you want to get a real flavor for what the left really feels about just this type of thing, so you can see they'll never complain about people waving Kurdish flags at leftist protests, or waving, this is another Kurdish flag at a leftist protest. This is also in Italy. They'll never complain about that. They'll defend Jeremy Corbyn, who is pretty much he supports all the countries that the gray zone supports: Iran, North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela, the IRA. They love him because they support the same people that he supports. So this is a simple case of people sticking to their team. And in this case, they are complaining here. Western coup launchers are creating a campaign to blame Evo Morales for fires in the Amazon. But the fact is that there have been fires in the Amazon for a very, very long time. And this is from Mangabai, which has reported on ecological disasters in both Venezuela and Cuba, because Mangabai actually believes in habitat preservation. And it says right here, firefighters in Bolivia are tackling conflagrations that have burned an area larger than Costa Rica. Several national parks and indigenous territories have been affected. Many indigenous and civil society groups are calling for an end to laws that allow burning. I spoke to ecologists, blah, blah, blah. And it says, despite over 6 weeks of firefighting, the infernos destroying Bolivia's forests continue to spread 5.3 million hectares. So why am I pivoting to this? These people don't care about the methodology of performing a coup. Okay, they like Evo Morales, right? Because he is a communist like them. But when Hugo Chavez, who is their godfather, attempted a coup in 1992, they don't seem to want to bring that up. Obviously, that might have been before some of them were involved in politics. It was in 1992, and it's been almost 30 years now. But 14 people were killed as he tried to overthrow the democratic government of Venezuela, and then he was put in prison for a few years and later became president. So they don't try to say, well, why is Hugo Chavez, who tried to come to power in a coup, why is he even qualified to run for president?
Fuck you, Ronnie.
Fuck you.
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 Fuck you, Ronnie.
Fuck you.
Fuck you, Ronnie.
Fuck you, Saddam Hussein.
Effectively, if you try to overthrow the government, you're a convicted felon. So the principle is just not there. They don't really believe in the idea of peaceful democracy. Just wanted to note this is something that hasn't been really covered in Uruguay. The center-left government has fallen, and another pink-tide state has gone over to the right. So you actually have a conservative, Luis Lacalle Pou, as the president-elect, and there's also another right-wing party. So in Latin America, which is where these people get most of their, that's where most of their financial support comes from. That's where their ideological home is. Their side is losing because their governments are mostly failing. In Uruguay and Bolivia, I would say that the performance hasn't been as bad as in Venezuela. I've looked at the economic numbers. I wouldn't say that they've done terribly, which is, but every once in a while people do look for a little bit of a change in the way their government works, and that's what democracy is about. Now, these people will say, well,
fuck you, Ronnie.
Fuck you.
Say, well, no, we have to keep the revolution going. The right wing is going to reverse our gains. Well, if you're so confident that your gains justify you staying in power, then maybe you should just trust the people in order to validate that. You don't get to decide whether your gains have to be preserved at the expense of the people's vote. You're not Barack Obama. So that's about it. Please like, share, and subscribe. Also subscribe to me on BitChute and on Minds.com, as well as on Subscribestar if you want to donate. All of those, you can find my tag at Chef Leopard, and you can find me on Gab at Starscream85, and I'll talk to you later.
Of Iraq.
Fuck you.
Fuck you.
Inside my future eye, what I see just makes me cry.